Mogul Motivation, educating and empowering entrepreneurs 1 week at a time, presented by True Stories Media. And I am your host, Antoine Twiz Taylor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mogul Motivation. I'm happy that you are here. If this is your first time listening, this podcast is for the aspiring entrepreneur who is trying to get over that hump. This podcast is for anybody who has a dream and is trying to elevate to success. This week's Monday conversation, I am sitting down with Nancy Williams. She is a certified franchise consultant, the owner of NValuable Franchising Consulting Firm, as well as a contributing writer for Black Enterprise Magazine. Nancy, how are you doing this morning?
I'm great, Antoine. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to doing this podcast.
No problem. Thank you for agreeing to do it because this is a very important topic that I believe for Black entrepreneurs out there. So, Nancy, how about you just tell us about your background? Like, what brought you to not just becoming an entrepreneur, but specializing in the franchising realm? What brought you here? Like, tell us about your background.
Sure. Great question, because it certainly was a development over time. I've always had an entrepreneur spirit. I graduated from UCLA, and while I was at UCLA, I did a couple of things. One, I had my own nonprofit organization helping kids get acclimated with the college environment so that it wasn't such a strange thing to them when they were thinking about, what to do after high school. So that was kind of my first official dip into the world of owning my own business. And then shortly after I graduated from UCLA, I had a partner. We started our own record label that focused mostly on gospel music, working with the UCLA Gospel Choir. So again, I've been an entrepreneur from early on. Decided to go into corporate for several reasons. Wanted to learn a lot more about business, how the corporate environment worked. I knew that would enhance my skill set for whatever I wanted to do later in life. So I ended up ultimately at Sprint. I worked at Nextel, and then Sprint bought Nextel. So I was there for 14 years as a director. And I had a team of 25, and we were mainly responsible for, I would say later in my career, the last 5 years of my career, I was responsible for helping Sprint store owners, both on contract and no contract, or postpaid and prepaid, however you like to refer to it. But we were responsible for setting up stores for Sprint affiliates, Sprint dealers, and making sure that they had what they needed in order to have their stores both get up and running and then function on a day-to-day basis. So whether that was bill pay, top up, handsets, all of those sorts of things we were responsible for ensuring happened at the store level. And that was both for Sprint affiliates as well as big box, so your Walmarts, your Best Buys of the world. So when I decided, my Sprint career was over just due to, I was getting a little bit bored. I didn't really see a lot of opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
I started to think about what was I going to do next, and I looked into franchising because I knew it was a structured environment. And while my experience was in customer service and sales, I didn't necessarily want to be doing all of it. And I know I needed help. I didn't have really any partners at the time that I could think of, to help with day-to-day operations. So I started looking at franchises. And that's when I stumbled upon the world of franchise consulting, because if anyone out there has gone through websites, that's one of the things that pops up when you're looking at the various franchise portals is, would you like to speak to a franchise consultant? So, I clicked on the button, and the rest is history. I started interviewing franchise consultants that had been in the business for quite some time, learned a lot about what the goal of a franchise consultant and goal and role and is. And then I also spoke to some of my mentors, some of my VPs, etc., in the corporate world that I knew had not gone back into the corporate world, and they had decided to purchase private businesses or franchises. And I talked to them about, did they use a consultant or a broker, and I asked them, if they thought that would be a good role for me, and they said absolutely. They thought I'd be great at it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of what drove me. But in addition to that, as I spoke to and interviewed a lot of franchise consultants, I realized that there were very few minorities in the business, and there were very few women. So I felt that I had sort of found my calling, that what I could do is bring more opportunity to African Americans and women when it comes to getting into business. And that was so important to me, because the reality is that you don't know what you don't know. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times our community is unaware of the assistance that consultants can provide in this space, and I just wanted to be a liaison, an advocate, and to have more, to increase the overall numbers of women and African Americans in business.
Wow, interesting. So, a couple things. So, number one, you know a thing or two about leading people, because you went from owning a nonprofit to a record label, to corporate America. You know a thing or two about leading people and being, a team player. That's number one.
Sure.
Number two, what you described, what you was doing at Sprint, kind of seems like franchising within itself. Kind of, it's kind of like
Exactly.
yeah, kind of like it was along the same lines of franchising. So, in a way, you was getting your, tutelage and learning while you were at Sprint before you even became a certified franchise consultant. And
Yes.
you saw the need, because even though you wanted to franchise initially yourself, you saw a need to basically bridge that gap, like you said, for more minority and women entrepreneurs to get into the franchising space. That's amazing to me.
Exactly. So glad you pointed that out, because a lot of times people think that if people are have entrepreneurial spirit, and they like entrepreneurship, that they're somehow anti-corporate. I completely disagree with that altogether. I think that what happens is, if you decide to get in corporate, you're either going to be drawn to that world and stay in that world, or you're going to get out of it what you need and learn from it, and go
Mhm.
apply that to whatever you do if you decide to buy a franchise or start your own business. There's some very valuable lessons you can learn in corporate,
Absolutely.
and that can make you a much better business owner. There's always a catch-22, though, because there is a comfort level in the corporate world, because of the high paychecks and a lot of the perks, that you really have to have that spirit to be able to cut ties and feel that you want to go on your own. So it's one of those where I do encourage it, because you can learn so much, but it does make it a little bit harder to make the leap, into being your own boss. So, but yeah, so to your point, you're exactly right. I mean, one of the reasons I felt comfortable getting into this role is that, those years at Sprint, that I was helping essentially entrepreneurs get their business up and running. While we didn't call it a franchise necessarily at Sprint, we had different names for it: affiliate, master programs,
Hmm.
master agent programs. It was essentially a franchise. So I came into this, before I even was officially a certified consultant, for me having years of experience in the role of franchising.
Okay, so the whole word franchise is usually a word that a lot of entrepreneurs are unfamiliar with. When I say unfamiliar, I mean, yeah, of course we know what a franchise is, but we don't know
Mhm.
how to do it. We don't know how to get started. So let's
Sure.
talk about that. How, if a entrepreneur right now, particularly black and minority entrepreneur right now, wanted to franchise a business, what should be their first start? How do you even get started?
So let's take it into perspective. So when you say an entrepreneur currently, that's a question of whether or not they're currently in a business, or they just have that spirit. So let's
Okay.
take the example of a person that says, you know what, I want to be my own boss. I don't know where to get started. Where do we go from here? So that's where I sit down and I talk to clients about a number of things. I mean, we sometimes refer to ourselves as franchise matchmakers, because that's that's essentially what we're doing. We're asking a series of questions, trying to understand your personality, short-term, long-term goals. What do you feel comfortable with? Where do you see yourself and your family? Do you want to work 9 to 5? Do you want Saturdays off? All of those questions that narrow down what a good business would be for someone. We always get people coming and saying, oh my gosh, I eat Subway every day of the week. And I see, when I go there to buy my sandwich, it's always a line out the door. So I think I should own a Subway.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the wrong reason to buy a business. Food in general is a very difficult business outside of the franchise world and even in the franchise world. So, just because you like to eat Subway and you see that there's a line does not mean that's the right business for you. So we have to ask a series of questions and break down layers of, where the person is today and where they want to be in the future. And of course, discuss things like, investment, levels, credit scores, all of those things. So that's what I do with the client that says, hey, I'm in the corporate world. I really want to be an entrepreneur. Where do we go from there? So I'll work with the client. We'll narrow down. I'll make some recommendations, and then I will work with the client all the way through the process. Meaning, I will set up the introduction with the franchisor. Be on those calls. I will provide you with tools that you can ask the franchisor as you go through the various steps, which includes interviewing current owners of that franchise. Again, I will provide you with tools to help facilitate that. If you need a referral for a business attorney so they can look over your franchise agreement, all of that. And then additionally, some aftercare. Once you've signed your agreement, I do follow up with you and stay in contact with you and the franchise, because one of the things I want to make sure is that the franchise is doing what they committed to do. And if not, how can I help that happen? And then, also because for me, it's an important relationship with the franchisor, because I'm not going to recommend them to future clients if they're not delivering on current clients. So that's what I do with someone that, says, I really want to do this. How do I get started? I also talk to them a lot about funding. I work with some of the top partners in the country on business funding. So, you can get I can set up a free consultation for clients to learn everything you'd want to know about funding. So that's one thing. And then again, I basically partner with the person through the process.
Is it easier, in your opinion, to get funding for a franchise as opposed to an entrepreneur starting their own business, their own independent business?
Yes, it is. So, great question. So the reason there's a few reasons for that. Most loans that people are getting to fund any kind of business are small business or SBA loans that are government backed loans distributed at the local level, state, city, local level. And so for those loans, they're looking for a couple of things. They're looking for a credit score of 680 or above. They're also looking for, as much as possible, a proven business plan. So, and then third, so let me just mention the three. So proven business plan, and the third is a 25 to 30% cash down on the total of the loan. So that's something to keep in mind, because I know a lot of people think that you can just get a loan and you don't have to supply any cash, but there is a requirement, because the SBA is looking for investors that are ready to invest in themselves, and so the SBA feels comfortable investing in them. So there is a requirement of cash even against an SBA loan. But moving back to the second point, which is the proven business plan, that's where franchises come in. It's important that the SBA feels comfortable lending money and feeling that they're going to get it back. That's the whole point of the program. So with a franchise, they're looking at the overall franchisor's numbers, which is supplied in their franchise disclosure document that's filed with the Federal Trade Commission. So those documents show, how many franchises opened and closed in every year for the past 10 years. They show, what we call an item 19, so their financial disclosures on how things are going with the franchise. So that is what someone takes to when they apply for an SBA loan, and it's already there. Someone that's starting up a business most likely has no financial history, because it's a startup. So that's why you see a lot, when people seek funding for independent businesses, they're going to things like angel investors or crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, those types of things, because those don't necessarily require any kind of track record of success.
Okay. Now, I went to a franchising expo in 2014 in New York City,
Mm-hmm,
and I saw so many businesses, that franchise, more
mm-hmm.
businesses than I, ever thought about. And I know
Sure.
you represent over like 400 brands when it
Mm-hmm,
comes to
mm-hmm.
franchising. It's different franchisers for different tax brackets. So, a lot of people think you have to have, a large amount of cash to franchise when that's really not true, is it? Like you don't have to be, making six figures per se for this and that. You can franchise companies, that are on a smaller tier and still, earn income. Is that true?
That is very true. So I would say most of the people investing in franchises are, if it's outside of food, they're investing somewhere between the 75 and $100,000 range. And while that may sound like a lot, I mean, I always like to put it in context for people. People purchase homes all the time. That's an investment. If you purchase a business, that's also an investment. You probably can't necessarily get, in certain parts of the country, a house under $100,000, but you certainly can get a business, and a business that you're building and can be a legacy for you, long term. So people need to put it in context in terms of what they're investing. But under 100,000 can get you a number of lucrative businesses in the franchise world. Anything from commercial and residential cleaning, which has a very low overhead and high return on investment, to children's education services, which include tutoring, you know, after school programs, during school programs, all of that type. Senior care, which is huge, obviously, because we have an aging population, so you can get a lucrative senior care business for an investment, between 75 and 100,000. So there are several categories where you don't, need to have a lot of cash in order to do that. And again, as I stated before, if you have a credit score of 680, you can apply for what we call an SBA sort of, quick loan, and that's 150,000 or less. And again, if you have 30,000 to put against that loan, they're going to fund your entire business with additional monies for working capital. So again, $30,000 is certainly doable for a lot of people, and when you're thinking about starting a business, that's a relatively reasonable investment.
Wow, that's amazing because again, like I said earlier, the whole word franchise just it scares people away. Like when people hear that, they automatically think of like the big brands,
Exactly. Exactly.
McDonald's, Burger King, and like, oh, I can't afford that. But
Right.
you can definitely get into the game and franchise smaller brand, well, lesser known brands. I'm not gonna call them smaller, but lesser
Right.
known brands, and generate that income for yourself and possibly create jobs. Like, tell us about that. Like, what are the numbers on jobs when it comes to franchising?
Oh, I mean, franchising has employed millions of people, and the number continues to grow annually. And that's because of a point that you just made, which is while people get a little bit intimidated by the bigger brands, what's happening more now is that people are understanding that starting smaller can get you to that larger number.
Okay.
So a lot of times I will talk to clients that say, oh, I want something that I can grow, and own multiple units or multiple territories. And that's great because you're actually thinking about the future. You're actually thinking about building an empire. And so starting with one is certainly a noble way to go. And to be honest, not all franchises will let you start with multiples. They have to protect the success of their owner network as well. So
Absolutely.
sometimes they'll make you start with one. Sometimes they'll let you option for more. But really, you need to concern yourself with being successful with one. And once you start building that up, I mean, most business owners will tell you, even if you're not franchising, once you start building a portfolio of businesses, it's a lot easier to get funding, and it's a lot easier to purchase other opportunities. I don't just work with clients that are looking to start new franchises. I work with clients daily that are looking to purchase existing franchises of an owner that's selling. So, we refer to that as the resale space, and that's a hot space because, people retire or people want to move on to another field or another business. Entrepreneurials tend to be serial, so they like to do a lot of things at one time. They don't necessarily want to stay with something for 5-10 years, and so they move on to something else. So that's another situation where if you have the cash and you're able to jump right into a business that's already up and running, that's another really great opportunity for people that are worried about it taking a couple of years to get started.
So with the whole resale aspect of it, what are some red flags when it comes to purchasing a franchise? Not necessarily with the resale, but that's just what made me think of that. Just in general, when you decide to buy a franchise, what are some red flags you suggest that entrepreneurs should look out for, or like?
Sure. So I'll take it from I'll take it from like a heat chart. So when I have clients that are looking for emerging brands, that means that they're okay with something that they saw that there's only a few of across the country and it's getting started, and they really want to get in on the front end, and they understand the risk of that, because obviously if you don't have the same track record as a more mature brand, there is some risk to that.
Absolutely.
So that's a different client that I handle, that they're willing to, they're a little less risk averse, and they're willing to get into something that's a little newer. On the other side of the fence, there are people that, hey, I've got this amount of money to invest. I want to invest in something that's pretty well known. Doesn't necessarily have to be known nationally. It could be a regional thing that they're just really familiar with and they want to get into. And so for those types of individuals, I coach them that they should be looking at brands that have 50 plus units, across the country. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, red flags, is responsiveness. So, the first thing I do when I'm recommending to a client a brand, I engage with that brand. If it's not something that I'm really familiar with, I'll engage with them. And if I'm not getting, return phone calls promptly, the information they're sending me isn't so great, that's a red flag to me. And I will explain that to my client. Sometimes they want to move forward and it turns out fine, but that would certainly be a red flag.
Okay.
Companies that don't have up-to-date franchise disclosure documents, the FDD that I mentioned earlier, that's an issue. So that should be a red flag. And then ultimately, one of the best deciding factors in whether you want to move forward or purchase a franchise is really what we call the validation piece with the current owners. If you are looking at a franchise, you need to get on the phone with as many current owners as you can and talk to them about their business. And if the franchise is only supplying you contact information for owners that are successful, then there's a problem. Okay. So when you speak to them, you want to make sure that they are giving you folks that have been in the network for close to 10 years, so their experience. Folks that have just gotten in, some mid-level, mid-range, maybe 5 years, and then also people in your area, because that's also important. What works on the East Coast may not work on the West Coast. So those are the kind of things that you really want to look out for when you're vetting a franchise.
A friend of mine here in the Midwest, based out of Chicago, he had a partner, and they franchised a small brand, a regional brand. Mm-hmm. And they ran into some issues. Basically, they weren't making as much money as they were supposed to have made. But basically, long story short, the franchisor wasn't providing them the support that they promised, and also was taking more of the royalties that they said that they would take. What do you suggest to entrepreneurs in that situation?
Well, that definitely becomes a legal matter, because if their franchise agreement states a particular royalty and that is not being, that's not being adhered to on the franchisor's part, I would definitely say you've got a legal matter that you've got to open, or start pursuing quickly. In terms of the support, That's a difficult one to gauge, and again, I don't know if your friends did the due diligence to the point where I'm suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if a franchisor is not giving their existing network the support that they need, then you're going to hear from the owners. The owners have no reason to not tell you the truth, because what's going to happen is those franchisee owners are going to fail in the system, and every time there's a failure at a franchise, it gets reported in that FDD document up through the FTC, and if they're enrolled in things like SBA registry and loans and funding, they will lose that qualification, and because the SBA is not getting paid back, and so they're going to lose that qualification for SBA registry. So there's a lot of things that are going to happen negatively if that franchise continues to fail. So it's really important that you talk to owners and you're specific about what your expectation of a support is. So that's one. The other advice I would give, and I know it's a personal plug to myself and my colleagues, but I really encourage people to use franchise consultants. Not all of us are perfect, but that's what we do daily. We talk to franchisors daily, so we're going to be able to tell you, we're not hearing such good things, or I talked to them last week, and the materials that they're providing aren't good. So again, if you speak to somebody that's in the industry and is there to help you, you're going to get some inside information that you just wouldn't receive just Googling on your own, or even just calling up the franchisor.
Absolutely, and yeah, that makes sense. You always need a professional to handle things for you, because you're never gonna
Mm-hmm.
know everything. That's why people hire wedding planners. That's why people hire,
Right, exactly.
lawyers. You need a professional that's there who is already in that realm that knows more than you do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously in the times of Google and internet, I mean, people always say, oh well, what can you do for me? I can jump online and I can Google McDonald's and go to their website and all of those things. Sure, of course you can do that, but I can guarantee you that you're not going to get the information that I can give you, that what's going on inside of McDonald's, or refer you to some of their owners currently that you're going to be able to talk to. So I mean, I don't represent McDonald's, but it's just really is an example of I have clients that have already purchased businesses with some of these brands
Mm-hmm.
that I can connect you with directly, and in the case me writing for Black Enterprise, that's what I do. I interview franchisees that have businesses, successful businesses, and then I can also connect people with those folks, and they can explain firsthand what their experience has been. So Google's great, it can get you so far, but it's not going to get you the inside information that you need, and I think people assume that they can get everything they need. Also, just recently I had a client that wasn't working with a consultant, and a friend of theirs referred them to me. They're looking at a particular industry, and when they called me, I said, well, I have a couple of other brands that you may be interested in this industry, and I made some calls, and I found out that there was a resale in their area, and the resale was going for much less than the business was valued at, because there was an issue with health for the owner, and he needed to sell, and it wasn't even the business wasn't being advertised openly, so it's kind of a hidden gem. So again, those are the types of things that brokers can find for you that you can't find on your own.
Now, tell us about, if an entrepreneur already has his own business, his own independent brand that he
Sure.
built up. At
Mm-hmm.
what point can he or she start franchising, and what are some steps that they could take to do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you got back to this, because I think we mentioned this in the beginning, and I wanted to get back to it. So that's the second type of client that I work with, and this is certainly less often, because franchising a business is no easy task, and it's not for the faint of heart.
Mm-hmm.
So if a client comes to me and says, "Hey, I have this business. It's doing great. I really love it. I think a lot of other people will love it. Should I consider franchising?" So the first thing is, you have to be in business 3 or more years. Most franchise companies that will help you with franchising your business are looking for a track record that a potential owner is going to be happy with and going to want to invest in. So you're going to have to at least have a good track record of 3 or more years. So that's number one. Number two is, you have to understand whether your business is easily duplicated, documented and duplicated, and can work in different states, different territories, different regions. So while we do have regional franchises, absolutely, it's not, we don't necessarily recommend that you franchise with the thought of only being regional. So you're sort of cutting yourself off. You want to be thinking, hey, I'd love my brand to be across the country and across the world. That's how great it is. So you really, it has to be something that can fit everywhere. So I like to give the example of healthy eating in California. That's great. We've got a lot of that here. We've got some incredible brands that I represent that I highly recommend. But a lot of it also it requires access to fresh fruits, grains, things that may not be as easy to get in other parts of the country, right?
Yeah.
So, some of those things you have to consider when you're looking at franchising. So that's just one example. So if your business is easily, duplicated, you can turn over the operational manual to somebody, and it's pretty easy for them to learn with some training provided by the franchisor. So that's another thing you want to think about. And then the third thing, in all honesty, is money. And we have to be honest about this. Most firms, including mine, and I can certainly, if there are entrepreneurs out there listening to this and they want to talk about franchising their business, they can certainly come to me, and I do that work. You're going to need at least $50,000, and that's because for mostly marketing, but that also includes things like there are 14 states that require that you register with their state your franchise disclosure document. So someone has to create that document, an attorney has to create that document, and then has to file with each of those 14 states. The other states that don't require it, you could certainly start, set up shop tomorrow, but for those 14, you must be registered. So that's one. But the other thing that a firm can provide you is marketing, and it's hard to get your name out there when no one knows who you are.
Absolutely.
So you're going to want to have a nice budget that's going to be able to put that out there. We say a minimum of $50,000, but if you're going to something like food where there's so much competition, you're talking probably more in the 100,000 range. So again, those three things: 3 years in business minimum. Easily duplicated business in all parts of the country, and then minimum of 50,000.
What would you say is the success rate for that type of tactic for franchising your own independent business?
I really can't tell you that number, and the only reason is that we don't know about the ones that have failed.
Okay.
So, my firm, and, there's lots of firms that do this. They will put a brand out there, and, it just never takes off. And so we just don't necessarily know which of those there were. And that's why I said it's not for the faint of heart. Franchising is something people need to understand that, a lot of people, when they're an entrepreneur and they start a business, they start that business because they love that business. They love working in that business every day. They love their clients, and it's something that, they're really passionate about. When you decide that you want to franchise a business, you then move from what you're passionate about to a full business person. Because your job is no longer running that business every day. Let's say you have a spa that you love, all your clients' names, right?
Right.
And you see them every day, and you work with your technicians, and you just love your team. Well, once you decide I'm going to franchise, you're out of that daily space. You are now working with my firm or someone else that's helping you get those documents written, get them filed, figure out a marketing plan. So so it's something. It's a transition that not everybody A is good at, but B ultimately doesn't want to do. So it's something you really have to think about, because you are becoming a different type of business person than the one that you've been used to on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're basically, you're letting your baby go. You're going
Correct.
from like that mom and pop, scenario to basically a global or national corporation with many
Correct.
hands into it. And yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs really don't want to do that.
That's
because
right.
Your business is your baby.
Yeah, and a lot of times I'll recommend people, before they jump from, I have this store and now I want to franchise, or I have this product and now I want to franchise. I recommend that they open multiple locations and maybe have somebody else purchase, or be a partner with you, and see how comfortable you are with letting go, right?
Yeah.
Because you're obviously not running 3 locations at one time. It's not possible. So you're going to have a manager of something else, or manager of another location. And if you're comfortable with that, then you'll be much more comfortable with it proliferating across the country without you being there on a daily basis. So like you said, a lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable with that. It is their baby. They own it. They want it to go exactly the way they want it to go. And while franchises have rules, the reality is, people are different, and they're going to do things a little bit differently, and you're going to have to be comfortable with that.
When you purchase a franchise for a brand, and I'm sure this is, it varies from brand to brand, but are there cases like when you purchase a franchise, does that make you a shareholder in that brand? Or how does that work, the franchise shareholder, dynamic?
Not generally.
Okay.
So let me describe to you the 2 most common franchises. It's a franchise where there is a franchisor structure, and you are paying royalties based on gross sales, right? So you're paying a percentage. You're paying a percentage of your sales back to the franchisor to account for things like marketing, local, national marketing, software licensing, all of those sorts of things. Some franchisors are doing payroll for you.
Okay.
Some franchisors have 24/7 call centers they're manning. So all royalties are going to that. I know a lot of people have a little bit of an issue with why don't want to pay you, but there's a lot going on in that background that the franchisee owner doesn't have to handle or worry about.
And that's the most common. That's the most common, right? The royalty setup.
It is the most common. Then there's what we call business opportunities, and a lot of business opportunities do not have royalties. They have an initial franchise fee, but they don't have an ongoing royalty rate. But what you'll find with that is that you tend to get less support. And there are things like vending machines or vending services, something that is a lot more autonomous and doesn't need as much support as something like a restaurant or a senior care facility or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I would say, so that's what you need to keep in mind. But so when you purchase a franchise, you are actually your own entity. So you're not considered a shareholder in that the franchise isn't your corporation. You're not part of that corporation. You're actually creating your own entity. So one of the first things that you do when you purchase a franchise is you sit down with your CPA and you decide how do you want to create your entity. So some people decide to be LLCs. Some people decide they need to be a corporation for many reasons. It can be an S corp or C corp, but all of that you work out with your CPA. And and just a side note on that, a lot of times people end up being an S corp or a C corp or going to the corporation because they're actually using their 401k to fund their business and to pay their salary. So if you're in a situation where you have enough cash in your 401k and you've decided, hey, I don't want to wait till I retire to use this money, I want to reinvest in myself now, there's great programs that are managed by firms that know how to repurpose a 401k tax-free, no penalties, and you can start your business and get a salary. So in those cases, you need to be a corporate status. So because you are creating your own entity, you're not considered a shareholder of a franchise. They're separate entity. You're your separate entity, and there's no tax dependence on each other. So that's important to know. It's interesting. I do get a lot of questions. A lot of people come to me. A lot of people have read the story about Chick-fil-A and how Chick-fil-A works. And everybody wants Chick-fil-A, and Chick-fil-A is great. Great brand. Lots of people love the food. They've done great things with the brand. But Chick-fil-A is a different model. We refer to it more as a profit-sharing model with Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A has a low point of entry in terms of investment. I believe now they require $15,000 for an owner to invest.
$15,000?
Yes, 15,000.
Wow.
But what happens is you don't actually own the store like you would if you had a McDonald's or if you had a Burger King or another large franchise. You are actually profit sharing. You're seen as the owner manager of that store, but if you were to leave or they were to close the store, it's not something you can sell. It's not a business you can sell. It does belong to corporate. So there's an agreement that it's owner operated, but it's more of a profit sharing model. You don't actually own the store.
That's interesting. I never knew that. I didn't know Chick-fil-A, did anything like that. I thought it was all, corporate,
No,
private,
no.
control.
Yeah, they do have corporate stores. They do have a combination of both, but they are a case where they do have franchisee owners. And I say this to let people know out there that it sounds great that it's 15,000. It's a low investment, but I will tell you that they get over 10,000 applicants annually, and they only open 100 stores each year. So
That
the
waiting list is
race to
long.
get a Chick-fil-A is a very difficult process, and people are in conversations back and forth, validation for years before they actually are awarded a Chick-fil-A. So, those are the things that you need to think about when you're looking at businesses.
What do you think is one of the biggest reasons why Black and minority entrepreneurs should really get into franchising? Like, after everything we talked about, what do you really think
Sure.
is one of the biggest reasons why we need to get into the space? Because there's not many of us, compared to other races. When you look at most of the businesses in Black and minority communities, they're franchised by other races. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So I think funding is definitely an issue and a concern in our community. A lot of people don't feel that they have the money or have the access to funding, and so the idea of I'm just going to start something small on my own is more palatable. Right, so that's really one of the reasons, like I said, I got into this business. Is yes, franchises do require an investment. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that you can make really good money, be in business for a long time, and grow easily because there's a structure in place and there's a lot of lessons learned that an independent business owner kind of has to learn and fumble along the way. And so for me, franchising should give you a level of comfort that owning an independent business doesn't necessarily give you. I also really encourage people to partner up with family members or friends that they trust, that complement them in business, and that they can split the investment with, because that again makes it easier. And I think people don't think about that enough, about partnering. And I would say, thirdly, I mean, we just have a natural fear in our community that that someone's out to get us or someone's going to cheat us. And again, that's another reason why I got into this business, because I'd like to help facilitate that role and say that's not the case at all. We have an instinctual fear just because of what's transpired in our country and things that have stopped us from getting ahead.
Of course.
And that's not necessarily the case with people that are immigrants to this country. They haven't had that discrimination. So that fear factor isn't necessarily there for them. In addition, it's hard and it's costly to get an education in this country when you're not from here. So if you're migrating over, you're thinking about, okay, so now I'm gonna have to get a college education and then compete, in the open market with other people for the corporate world. So they'll come over or they'll invest while they're in their country, and they'll get a investor's visa to come over and run the business, and they don't have that same fear or stigma that they're going to be discriminated against or failure, and they just jump right in with both feet. And they've seen amazing success with it. They don't give up the businesses. They pass them on, right, to family members, and it just becomes a legacy for them. And it's something that we need to start doing now so that we can be building that. And the fear of unemployment and those kind of things will be less for us because we're controlling our own destiny.
Absolutely, I agree with that. That's a lot of powerful wisdom. So, how can we get in contact with you, Nancy? Everybody out there listening, if they want to follow up with you and get more information outside of this podcast, how can they contact you?
Sure. So I have a toll-free number that you can call me on anytime, 800-710-7457. And then you can email me at any time at Nancy at the letter N, followed by Valuable Franchise Consulting. So it's Invaluable Franchise Consulting. I'm on Twitter as well as LinkedIn. You can reach me there as well. Just search for Nancy Williams Franchise Consultant, and it usually pops right up. So call me anytime. As I said, I'm more than willing to help. People understand a lot more about the franchising world, get more comfortable with it. Do radio interviews and podcasts, because really it's about getting the word out so that, as we talked about, people get much more comfortable with being business owners, to break down some of those barriers of fear, and at the very least learn what's out there, and also learn how you can finance a business, because if you're not in a position to do it today, doesn't mean you won't be in a position to do it next year, and you can't work toward it unless you know what's required.
And what's one last piece of Mogul Motivation you would like to tell all the entrepreneurs out there listening?
I would say you've got to search for who you are and what you want, and spend time doing that. It isn't an easy discussion to have with yourself. As I said, if you are already in corporate America or have a steady job, you've got to be able to have the confidence in yourself to say, I'm making all this money for someone else. I know I can do it for myself, and let me explore that. And and don't give up. If you have that conversation once and you just set it aside, keep revisiting it, because if it's tugging at you, it means there's something there, and you really shouldn't ignore it. You should explore it.
Don't ignore it, explore it. Powerful words.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Nancy Williams, for sitting down with us this week on the Monday Conversation. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure too, as well. Anytime.
All right, you have a great day. And everybody out there listening, let's continue to work, let's continue to imagine reality, and let's make it happen. Until next week.